the leaders of the Group of Seven Nations have agreed to give Ukraine a $50 billion loan to address the fallout from President Vladimir Putin's continued war on Ukraine, a senior administration official said Thursday. The loan would be funded by interest earned on profits from Russia's frozen assets, largely held in Europe. The loan will fund military aid, humanitarian support, and reconstruction costs. The move comes as Mr. Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a separate bilateral security agreement. The U.S.-Ukraine Security Agreement commits U.S. support to Ukraine for the next decade, including military training, intelligence sharing, and weapons assistance. The U.S. President and leaders of Italy, Canada, Germany, France, Canada, they say Canada twice for some reason, and the United Kingdom are in Italy for a series of G7 meetings this week. Mr. Biden and Zelensky held a joint press conference in Italy on Thursday. We've taken 3 major steps to G7 that collectively show Putin he cannot wait us out, Mr. Biden said. He cannot divide us, and we'll be with Ukraine until they prevail in this war. First is the bilateral security agreement just signed. Second, historic agreement to provide $50 billion in value from Russian sovereignty assets to Ukraine. And third, an agreement to ensure our sanction efforts disrupt third countries that are supplying Russia's war efforts. For his part, Zelensky thanked Mr. Biden and Congress for their aid and offered to thank every American heart that does not betray freedom and supports us. The security agreement fulfills a pledge last year to solidify Ukrainian security and is meant to be a bridge to an eventual invitation to Ukraine to join NATO. More than a dozen other nations have similar security agreements with Ukraine. The president's news conference with Zelensky follows a day of meetings with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and leaders of the other G7 nations with advanced industrialized economies. As Mr. Biden was departing the U.S. for Italy, the Treasury and Commerce Departments announced a new round of sanctions targeting Russia and its war machine. The latest sanctions are aimed at showing Russia's military growth as it continues its war in Ukraine. The sanctions will make it harder for Russia to import supplies to build military equipment, though they will still allow food and goods to get into Russia outside those sectors. The Biden administration is now allowing Ukraine to use U.S. weapons across the border into Russia near the city of Kharkiv, a policy change that the White House says came with Russia opening a new front in its war. Our position here, we believe, is straightforward and commonsensical, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters earlier this week. Russians are launching attacks from one side of the border directly onto the other side of the border, and Ukraine ought to be able to fire back across that border. On Thursday, Mr. Biden said the U.S. stands by its policy of disallowing longer-range U.S. weapons into Russian territory. Mr. Biden and Zelensky also met last week on the sidelines of D-Day memorial events in France. Then Mr. Biden publicly apologized to Zelensky for months-long holdup in military assistance that allowed Russia to make gains in its war. You haven't bowed down, you haven't yielded at all, Mr. Biden told Zelensky in France. You continue to fight in a way that is just remarkable. Just remarkable. We're not going to walk away from you. During his press conference with Zelensky Thursday, the president was asked if he is satisfied with the justice system after his son Hunter was convicted of felony gun charges this week. Mr. Biden reiterated that he will not pardon his son. I'm extremely proud of my son Hunter, Mr. Biden said. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him. I can actually believe that Biden probably won't pardon his son. It's not that big of a stretch to me. I mean, the whole Biden crime family thing is just a Republican, line they keep throwing around. If Hunter does something bad, then it must mean his dad is doing something bad. Well, I was more interested in the fact that I saw something so we talk about a lot of these conservative sources will take something and they'll make it sound worse than it actually is, or sound written in a way that is designed to make a lot of people go, what? So I go and I look at this article. Well, I go on Twitter, and this same news story about this agreement that's been signed by the G7 countries, there is a person who wrote that Biden agreed to 10 years of commitment to the U.S. toward Ukraine. Now, the second somebody hears something like that, they start thinking, oh man, Biden had said that he's going to find a way for the U.S. to keep giving Ukraine money for 10 years. But they don't mention in that Twitter misinformation sphere, or I guess dishonest way of framing, that the money, as far as this agreement is concerned, is coming through the frozen assets for Russia. The Russian sovereign assets to Ukraine, rather. They don't mention that because they want to make it sound like Biden is just taking all these dollars that could be. We've already established people don't actually care about helping out Americans with funds. That's why they're against like literally funding any government program whatsoever. But he's making it. They make it sound like Biden is taking American money and just throwing it over to this other country when it's really not the case. And again, as someone who hasn't been the biggest Ukraine just backer, we've talked before about how I have had problems with how much money was sent over there. I don't see an issue with a bunch of countries that have a similar belief system of democracies and coming together and, again, not using their own funds, but funds that have been frozen from another region, and saying we are in support of you, we stand with you. We are not going to side with Russia at all in anything it does until this conflict is over. This is probably the least controversial Ukraine story I've seen, at least involving the U.S., where it's like if Biden wants to sign an agreement with other G7 countries to just give these people some money from another source, I don't really see any issue here. But also, it is funny to this is such a good example of how misinformation gets spread around. Because I saw them on Twitter. Biden's giving more American money for a decade. He won't even be in office. It's like, okay, kind of not the point. And also, I should say that I'm surprised Ukraine and any of the other G7 countries would have anything to do with us after the Trump era. I mean, let's not forget the Iran nuclear deal. You have all these countries sign on, and then 3 years later, a Republican gets in office and rips it up. So the U.S.'s word really on the international stage doesn't mean much of anything. So we should be damn near shocked that any country would look at us and say, "Oh yeah, we'll let them sign this paper," and not be convinced that if a Republican gets in office, they're going to just tear up whatever their Democratic predecessor decided to go along with. Because trust me, we're going to see more and more of that. We have a very hard time doing anything outside of a partisan lens. Like most American policies with regard to other countries are not supported or helped to be enacted by other countries. So it really is like a stab in the back to do that to other regions, which is why I said I'm surprised they even allow us to sign anything. Like the other G7 countries just said, "Hey, we remember the Iran nuclear deal. Just go home, America," and they would have been perfectly valid for not trusting us. So, I hope this conflict ends sooner than later. It's already been 2 years, and I'm ready for it to wrap up, and I think most people are as well.